The ability to potentially say, well, this is a champion. This is an expert on Excel. A 2022 expert on Excel. This is a person who knows a lot about teams or employee experience challenges, right? Like this person knows a lot about great leadership, or they are nominated as an exemplary leader.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace?
So let's talk about some ideas to enhance employee experience around collaboration. I've got a few that I wanted to share today, and then we'll kind of go from there. The first one that I have here is a simple one. Essentially, you have a set of projects or activities that are going on internally, and you're enabling people to apply to those, express interest in them, kind of create waiting lists for them, approvals, that the people can be added to it, etc. Now, this is obviously a very professional services centric example. This works really well in professional services organizations, but it doesn't need to be limited to that, right? You can think of other scenarios inside of other organizations like products. We're building a product. Who would be interested in, applying to learn more about that, to be part of that team, even if it's like a temporary thing? Remember, we talked about connecting employees. So a technique we've actually seen some interesting success with is organizations that actually say, oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to kind of like paired programming. We're going to incorporate these people so they can apply and join these other teams for a little bit of time, not long, just like a couple team meetings and things like that, just a shadow to learn about it and learn more about products, learn more about these things. Again, there's obviously privacy considerations here, but if you get through those, they can be really great ways to, again, build about a bigger network, help people understand the lateral places or progressive places they can grow in the organization, which greatly increases retention. Like this is one of the best ways to attack that very real problem that we have today around, resignation challenges and things like that. So this is an idea. You can click on learn more about this idea, and it'll take you to like where there's architecture diagrams and more explaining it. Or you can click on the discover another 40 solutions and see more. So let's go on to some other examples. Another big one that we find very helpful for collaboration is digital workplace directories. So if you don't know this, sprawl is a big challenge when it comes to collaboration. We have collaborative sprawl. We have digital spaces, teams, SharePoint sites, communities, where it's difficult to sometimes know where to go and how to collaborate. And so having something like a directory allows us to explore those spaces, navigate around them, and be quicker to getting to the collaborative outcomes that we're trying to go for. They're also really interesting because when you have things like the department, of a space, the product of the space, the client of the space, if you have that information about a space, which is what a directory empowers, governance can be implemented on the back end, because now you can be programmatic. You can say, well, for all of the HR related spaces, we're going to have this information management policy. We're going to have these sort of security attestation steps, et cetera. And what these can enable is potentially a lot more refinement on collaboration, where again, there's less busy signals because I'm only in the spaces I should be. I'm only collaborating in the active spaces that matter to me. And while the tools like Microsoft Teams have tried their best to move up the value chain and help with this, with like pinning, favoriting, and things like that, there's still a lot of gaps in that. And so having a digital workplace directory can be very helpful. Now, this is one where unfortunately I don't have enough time to explain it fully. So I would suggest, if you're interested in understanding the governance side of this, like why it's so important to manage these spaces, or you have peers that care about that, this is an excellent resource that they can look at that's very clear to understand, worded well, and it explains not only how you get to the outcome of a digital workplace directory, but why you need to manage these spaces in the first place. Why, what's the difference between unmanaged sprawl and managed sprawl, and what should we do about it? So I hope that resource becomes helpful for you guys. Again, all these resource reference links you can click back yourself, or we'll see at the end as well. Icebreaking, I mentioned this one, really important for collaboration to create greater networks and stronger networks. Now, this is one where I actually don't think it's ready. Like you couldn't just install this and go, because the risk is it's a opt-in, but it's anonymous. It's randomized with a very large collection of potential random participants. What we typically find is you take this code and you slightly tweak it. So an organization might add some really simple stuff, like when you opt in, you actually say, these are my subject areas of interest, like these topics are things that I'm interested in. And because you have those topics, now we can be a little bit more facilitated for why you should break the ice. Like you guys both share an interest in this topic. It doesn't look like you know each other. You certainly don't work in the same working group. So we're recommending you connect with one another. Here's some dates and times that might work for you. Go have your water cooler or coffee discussion. So this idea of connecting employees is something we can proactively effectively do with tools like this. And a really great example of this is available right here, where you could just click on that with the developer support or someone more technical. You could deploy this in your own environment and see exactly how it works and how you could potentially solve this problem. Now, again, should you use this in production at scale as is? No, but I think it's a really good example, and it's almost there. You just need some minor tweaks if you want to. There are third-party products in the ecosystem that have similar solutions. Another really fun example, I like this one, is profile cards. So when you think of collaboration, we think of people. Here's my face, right? And a lot of times when we think of collaboration in that scenario, we don't think of how we can actually enrich people's profile cards. So assuming people even use profile pictures, which is a different discussion, even if they don't, you can still use this. The ability to potentially say, well, this is a champion. This is an expert on Excel. A 2022 expert on Excel. This is a person who knows a lot about teams or employee experience challenges, right? Like this person knows a lot about great leadership, or they are nominated as an exemplary leader. 25-year employee. You can use technically this idea of the rich profile enrichment for the picture. You can use it for the badging for all sorts of scenarios. It doesn't have to be for what Microsoft's suggesting in this example, which, by the way, you can try and download and install it yourself. But it's a really good example of using capabilities that are in the platform in clever ways to enrich collaboration. And I think that this is an interesting one, especially with champion programs. There's some other stuff in there around tournament of teams, but for the sake of time, I'll move on. You can read about it yourself, either in the idea book or by clicking through and reading the GitHub repos. Here's another example. I see this all the time. A lot of times I hear people say, well, we really want people to be able to have a registration form and sign up for a digital event. And I say, Teams webinars, it's been around for a while. You have all that capability. And they go, cool, I didn't know that. Sometimes they say, I want that, but I actually want to have a number of registrants. I want to have a limit on the number of people, or I want to have overflow, or I want to have a physical environment, like a physical space for the event and a virtual one, and so on and so forth. When you start to get to these more complex things, the out-of-the-box functionality sometimes doesn't service your needs. And so event collaboration, event sign-up, event registration, things like that, especially an internal environment, employee experience challenge, becomes something that you could potentially improve. And so this is one example of how to improve that, where you actually have this idea of registered participants, you have available slots, you have wait lists, and more already pre-built. Really, really great example of a solution. Again, I think this one's pretty much ready to go if you want to play with it yourself. And it might avoid you buying a third-party tool that's unnecessary and has a bunch of other bloat when you just needed something like this. Here's another example. I know this doesn't feel collaborative, but I wanted to highlight it on purpose as one of the last examples. I have one more after this. Here you have this example of collaboration that's more process-centric, right? I'm a construction or engineering company. We have staff sites. This location has people coordinating on it. I want to make sure, check in on that site. Like, what's the site status? What's going on there? So doing structured things like check-ins and things like that can also be done, in these collaboration tools, and have a collaboration experience at its forefront, where you have messaging and things like that versus just traditional, boom, you get some sort of message on some app that you have to take a picture and send something. You could have the full power of Teams in that experience, as well as the ability to still add those images and things like that you need to do from a process perspective. Here's another really wonderful example. I love this one. I would really encourage you to play with this one. This is one of my favorite ones. I know it's not exactly how it's being used, but I always like to describe it as almost like study groups. So you create these groups within the organization, these collections where people can apply and join, and then they're on a subject area, right? So let's learn something together. Remember, I mentioned social learning and shared learning is so important right now. So let's learn something together, or let's work on a problem together as an organization. Let's do a hackathon. Let's do all sorts of different things. So growing your skills and skill gaps is something that you can do a lot with here. And I wanted to highlight that from a collaboration perspective, that there's an opportunity there. I'll talk a bit more about that in the next session. And then great idea app as well, I think, is another one. Innovation, sometimes we do like a Yammer community can be used for an innovation challenge, like a ideation challenge, right? You might do on a Yammer community, but having something like behind the scenes for long term, right? So where all the ideas can be populated, where we have ranking, with that history, where it's really easy to share it, socially. Of course, you can share a Yammer post in the same way in a Teams message, but that quick and easy access for sharing becomes really valuable here. So these are all ways in which, even if you don't like this app for deployment, it's still useful to understand how are they thinking of, how did this community lead who made this app, how did they think about how people might deal with innovation in a team-centric way, in a Teams-enabled future, right? So very, very helpful.